Okay, so are you ready for this? We're diving back into ancient Rome, but with a twist.
Sounds intriguing. What are we looking at today?
We're tackling Gladiator, the sequel to Gladiator. A lot of you requested this one, and I gotta say, I'm a little nervous.
Yeah, the original Gladiator, that's a tough act to follow.
Right. I mean, iconic performance, epic story, the music. Did this sequel even stand a chance?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
Exactly. We've got a review here, and let's just say it's a mixed bag. Visually, apparently, it's amazing.
Oh, that's good at least. Big budget, I assume.
Huge. And Denzel Washington is in it.
Wow, okay, so we've got epic scale and a great actor. Sounds promising.
Hold on, there's more. The review, it mentions baffling pacing and the script being an unnecessary continuation. Ouch.
Oh, okay, so maybe not a perfect masterpiece then.
Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
getting that vibe. So no spoilers, but give me the overall verdict. Are you not entertained?
Honestly, it's a tough one. The review says that Aya is visually spectacular and entertaining, but it just doesn't hit the same heights as the original.
Interesting. So visually a 10, but emotionally a bit hollow.
Yeah, something like that. It's missing that emotional depth, that originality that made Gladiator so powerful.
Okay, that makes sense. The original Gladiator, that was such a gut punch, right? I mean, Maximus's journey, you felt every loss, every victory.
Absolutely. You were right there with him in the arena.
Exactly. But this review, they call the pacing baffling, which for an action movie, I mean, how does that even happen?
It's more common than you think. Pacing isn't just about speed, it's about how the story unfolds, how the tension builds. Think of it like a symphony.
Okay, I'm listening.
You have moments of quiet, then the music swells, then it crashes down. It's all about creating those emotional peaks and valleys.
I see. So it's about controlling the rhythm of the story to really draw you in.
Right. And in Gladiator, the review suggests the action is there, it's big, but it lacks that buildup. It's just boom, boom, boom without any emotional payoff.
Okay, so that's the baffling pacing. But I gotta ask, the review mentioned a shark-infested coliseum. Sharks.
I know, right?
So how can a scene with sharks and gladiators lack tension?
That's the thing. On paper, it sounds amazing. But the review argues that the execution falls flat.
I'm really trying to picture this. How could they mess that up?
Remember the original Gladiator? The scene where Maximus first enters the arena in Rome?
Of course.
Yes.
The dust, the roar of the crowd, you could feel the weight of that moment.
Right. The tension was palpable. But in Gladiator, it sounds like they just throw these epic elements at you without building that emotional foundation.
So it's all flash and no substance.
Basically, the review calls out the gladiator battles specifically. They're frustratingly dispatched in a flash, no time to connect with the characters or understand what's at stake.
So it's like, bam, fight's over, next scene. You don't get invested in who lives or dies.
Exactly. And that's a huge missed opportunity because that's where the real heart of the story should be. You know those moments in Gladiator where they focus on Maximus's face just for a second, and you see all the turmoil he's going through?
Powerful stuff.
That's what's missing here. They've got the spectacle, but they forgot about the human element.
So we've got pacing issues, a lack of heart, and then there's this whole unnecessary continuation thing. Ouch. But they did like Denzel Washington, right?
Oh, yeah. Denzel, he's the bright spot. The review says he's fantastic, charismatic, knows when to play it serious and when to have a little fun with it.
Well, that's something. Maybe he's the saving grace of this whole thing.
Maybe. But even a great performance can only do so much.
True. But going back to the unnecessary continuation comment, what exactly did they mean by that?
The review seems to suggest that Gladiator relies too heavily on the original, on nostalgia, instead of telling its own story. It's like they took all the familiar elements, the gladiatorial combat, the political intrigue, and just rehashed them without adding anything new or insightful.
So it's basically Gladiator, the remix.
Yeah, kind of. And that's a shame because of the world of Gladiator, there's so much potential there to explore.
I mean, imagine, right, we could have delved deeper into Roman society or maybe followed a completely different character with their own story.
Exactly. But instead, we get this rehash of familiar themes and plot points. The review specifically calls out the ending. Apparently, it relies on a flashback that feels like a total cop-out.
Really? Like they just couldn't come up with a satisfying conclusion of their own.
That's the impression I got. It's like they said, hey, remember that emotional moment from the first movie? Let's just do that again.
So we've got pacing problems, a script that feels unoriginal, and a disappointing ending. It's not looking good for Gladiator.
Not so far, no. But we've only scratched the surface.
True. We've still got a lot to unpack, especially Denzel's performance. That sounds like the one shining light in all of this. Ready to dive into that.
Absolutely. Let's see what Denzel brings to the arena. So Denzel, huh? The review said something about him bringing gravitas to the role. I mean, he always does, right?
Right. It's Denzel. But it sounds like he's really bringing something special to this, even with a maybe not so great script. Like, they said he's commanding yet vulnerable. That's a tough balance to strike.
It is. And that makes me think of, some of his other roles where he's played those kind of morally ambiguous
Oh,
characters.
totally. Like Training Day, right. You never knew if you should love him or hate him.
Exactly. And it sounds like his character in Gladiator might be in that same vein. Someone who's powerful, but maybe not always using that power for good.
Ooh, interesting. So maybe that's what saves it, that Denzel brings this complexity that the rest of the movie is missing.
Could be. The review also mentioned that he brings some humor to the role, like he knows when to wink at the audience.
Okay, now that I got to see. Even if the rest of the movie is a letdown, I could watch Denzel be charming and funny anytime.
Right. But it does make you wonder, can even a Denzel-level performance rescue a movie that's fundamentally flawed?
That's the big question, isn't it? Like, if the story's not there, the pacing is off, does it even matter how good the acting is?
Good point. It's like, having an amazing chef trying to make a meal with, like, stale ingredients. They can only do so much.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the good Denzel, but let's get back to the bad and the ugly. That whole unnecessary continuation thing, the nostalgia overload. Can we unpack that a bit more?
Yeah, it seems like they took everything we loved about the original, the gladiators, the politics, the revenge plot, and just sort of copied and pasted it.
Without adding anything new.
Exactly, and that's what makes it feel so unnecessary. Like, why tell this story if you're not going to say anything new?
I guess they were afraid to mess with the formula. Like, Gladiator was such a hit. Why risk changing things up?
Maybe. But I think that's a mistake. The world of Gladiator, there's so much more they could have done with it. What about the lives of ordinary Romans? Or the gladiators who weren't, Maximus-level heroes?
Right. There are so many stories they could have told. Instead, they chose the safe route, the predictable sequel. What a bummer.
It is. It feels like a missed opportunity. And you know what else feels like a missed opportunity? That ending.
Oh yeah, the flashback ending. The review really ripped into that one. I mean, are flashbacks always a bad idea?
Not necessarily. I mean, when done well, they can add layers to a story, give you insights into the characters. But in this case, it sounds like they just used it as a shortcut to try and make us feel something.
Like, oh, remember how sad you were in the first movie? Feel sad again.
Pretty much. They didn't earn that emotion in this movie, so they tried to borrow it from the original.
Lazy storytelling. So it's not just the pacing and the lack of originality, it's the emotional core that's missing. This movie, it just feels hollow.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. They focus so much on the spectacle that they forgot about the heart.
And that's a shame because Gladiator had so much heart. You felt for Maximus, you rooted for him, you wanted him to get his revenge, find peace.
Absolutely. It was a powerful story about loss, redemption, finding your purpose.
And this one, it sounds like it's just trying to cash in on those feelings without understanding what made them so powerful in the first place.
It happens. Sequels, it's a tricky business. But before we totally write this one off, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, the pacing. The review called it baffling, and I'm really curious to dig into that a bit more.
Yeah, okay, let's break that down.
Sure.
What exactly made the pacing so baffling?
Well, they mentioned the gladiator fights being too short, but it's more than that. It's like the whole movie feels rushed, like they're trying to cram too much story into not enough time.
Okay, I think I see what you mean. It's like they're hitting all the plot points, but they're not letting any of them breathe.
Exactly. And that can be really jarring for the viewer, right? You're not given the time to process what's happening, to let the emotions sink in.
It's like they're assuming we have the attention span of a goldfish. Quick, show them explosions. Now a chariot race. Don't let them get bored.
And in doing so, they completely undermine the emotional impact of the story.
So in a way, the pacing issues actually contribute to the lack of heart. Because we're not given the time to connect with the characters or feel the weight of their struggles.
Right. It all becomes superficial, a series of events without any real emotional depth.
And that's a shame because pacing, when done well, can be so effective. Think of movies like Jaws or Silence of the Lambs. Those films build tension slowly, deliberately, and it makes the payoff so much more powerful.
Absolutely. They understand the power of silence, of letting the moments breathe.
It's like sometimes you need to slow down to speed up. You know?
Mm.
Let the story unfold naturally, and the audience will be right there with you.
Well said. But in Gladiator, it sounds like they just hit the gas and never let up, sacrificing substance for speed.
And the result? A movie that feels empty, despite all the flashy visuals and big-name actors?
It's a classic case of style over substance, and it's a shame because, as we've said, there was so much potential here.
Okay, so maybe Gladiator isn't the sequel we were hoping for, but hey, maybe it's still a fun popcorn flick, right?
Perhaps. Sometimes you just want to switch off your brain and enjoy the ride.
True. But I think what's frustrating is that this movie could have been so much more. It could have been a worthy successor to Gladiator, a film that explored this world in new and exciting ways.
I agree. It's a missed opportunity, but it's also a good reminder that sequels are tough. Capturing the magic of the original, it's not easy.
So maybe Gladiator is a cautionary tale for filmmakers, a reminder that bigger isn't always better.
Exactly. Sometimes a simpler, more character-driven story can be far more impactful than all the CGI and explosions in the world.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything, haven't we? Pacing, spectacle, lack of heart, the good Denzel, the bad ending.
I think so. But before we wrap up, I think it's important to remember that all of this is just our interpretation of one review.
That's true. Film is subjective, after all. What we find disappointing, others might enjoy.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, if you're curious about Gladiator, go see it for yourself. You might be pleasantly surprised. Or you might just end up appreciating Denzel Washington's awesomeness.
That's always a win. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Agreed. It's been a fascinating discussion.
It has. Thanks for joining me on this journey into ancient Rome, or at least the Hollywood version of it.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk movies.
And to everyone listening, thanks for sending in your requests and for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep watching, keep thinking, and keep those requests coming. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Pacing, spectacle, Denzel being awesome. But something keeps nagging at me.
What's that?
The emotional side of things, or rather the lack of it. This review that keeps saying Gladiator feels emotionally hollow.
You're picking up on something really important. A good story, it needs to make you feel something, right?
Exactly. It's not just about the action or the plot twists. It's about connecting with the characters on an emotional level, feeling what they feel.
And that seems to be what's missing here. The review called the emotional stakes rushed, like they didn't give them the space to breathe.
I'm thinking back to the original Gladiator and how invested we were in Maximus's journey. Every setback, every victory, you felt it with him.
Absolutely. You were right there in the arena with him.
Right. But with Gladiator, it sounds like those moments fall flat. The review even mentioned how Lucius's whole resentment towards his mother, that could have been such a powerful emotional thread, but they just kind of brushed over it.
Yeah, it's like they were afraid to go there, to really explore those deeper emotions.
So they went for the easy way out, the quick resolution, and in the process, they lost that emotional punch.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that ending with the flashback. The review really hammered that as a lazy way to try and evoke emotion.
Okay, so flashbacks, are they always bad? Or is it more about how they're used?
I think they can be effective, but only if they're done well. They need to add something to the story, give you new information or a deeper understanding of the character.
But in Gladiator, it sounds like they just used it as a crutch, a way to try to make us feel something without actually earning it.
Right. It's like they were saying, hey, remember how much you cried during this scene in the first movie? Well, try again.
But it doesn't work because they haven't laid the groundwork for those emotions in this story. It feels cheap, unearned.
Exactly. And that's ultimately what's so disappointing about Gladiator. It's a film that wants to be epic, wants to make us feel, but it just falls short.
So all style and no substance.
Pretty much. Which is a shame because, as we've discussed, there was so much potential here.
Right. This could have been a movie that really resonated with audiences, that stayed with you long after the credits roll.
Absolutely. But instead we got, well, what we got.
A missed opportunity. But hey, maybe it's still a fun way to kill a couple of hours.
Maybe if you go in with the right expectations, expecting a popcorn flick and not much else.
That's true. Sometimes you just want to be entertained, not necessarily challenged or emotionally drained.
Right. And there's a place for that kind of movie, too.
Well, I think we've pretty much dissected Gladiator from every angle. The good, the bad, the baffling pacing, the Denzel of it all.
We covered it all.
And hopefully we've given our listeners enough information to decide if this is a movie they want to see.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's up to each individual to decide what they find entertaining.
Well said.
Mm.
So, to all our listeners out there, if you're curious about Gladiator, go check it out. You might love it, you might hate it, but at least you'll have an opinion.
And that's what matters. Form your own opinions. Don't just take our word for it.
Exactly. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining me on this journey into ancient Rome.
It's been a pleasure. Always fun to chat movies with you.
And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in and for sending us your movie requests. Keep them coming, and we'll keep diving deep. Until next time, happy watching.